Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. The Environmental Protection Agency is pulling back part of a landmark rule that was supposed to limit toxic forever chemicals in drinking water. PFAS contamination is a national issue, but it hits especially close to home here in North Carolina. WRAL climate reporter Liz McLaughlin joins us now to break down what this rollback means for our state and how residents and advocates are responding. Liz, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is the EPA changing here?
So, Grace, the EPA says it will maintain strict drinking water limits for two of the most harmful PFAS chemicals, PFOA and PFOS. These are legacy chemicals that are no longer in use, and there's a huge body of research showing just how harmful they are. But EPA is pushing back the deadline to comply with those limits from 2029 to 2031, and it's rolling back limits altogether for 4 other types of PFAS compounds, including Gen X, which is a big concern here in North Carolina. Gen X, as you might remember, is the chemical that polluted thousands of wells and the Cape Fear River drinking water supply near the Chemours plant in Fayetteville. Chemours, which was a spinoff from DuPont, discharged Gen X into the environment for decades. In 2017, researchers discovered high levels of the chemical in the river, which supplies drinking water to hundreds of thousands of people downstream in Wilmington, etc. And that discovery triggered legal action and a consent order negotiated by the Southern Environmental Law Center, who I spoke with for this story.
It's especially problematic in North Carolina because we do not have a state agency that is protecting North Carolinians from industrial pollution.
SELC forced Chemours to install technology to stop emissions and discharges from the facility, but it is in so many drinking water systems across the state, more than 300. So more than 3 million people, Grace, in our state have contaminated drinking water right now.
So how are people responding to this here in North Carolina?
The reaction's been really strong from advocates and residents calling it a step backward. I spoke to Kelly Moser, a senior attorney with SELC, who said this.
It's terrible news. This action announced today is ill-advised. It's unlawful, and it is abandons North Carolina communities from much needed safeguards and to ensure that we have safe drinking water.
She also pointed out that the rollback may actually violate the Safe Drinking Water Act, which prevents the EPA from weakening finalized standards.
And what about the view from people living with PFAS contamination? I know that we've talked to several families in our documentaries and things like that.
Absolutely. And by the way, if you want to learn more about PFAS, that documentary is available for free on YouTube. It's called Forever Chemicals, North Carolina's Toxic Tap Water. And I spoke with Jamie White this week, who lives near the Chemours plant. She has been in some of our reporting over the years because she lives in the Grays Creek area, just a mile or two from the plant, and has had contaminated water, or is at least known about the contaminated water for 7.5 years now. So she says, I've been waiting for a solution for that amount of time. It's not like we learned about this yesterday. And since Gen X was discovered in the Cape Fear River, she and her neighbors have just been drinking bottled water. They've been kind of in this back and forth with Chemours trying to get filters and things like that. Now, she has a well, but Fayetteville and a lot of other places for these with contaminated wells has proposed bringing public water to these affected areas. And cleaning up the public water is exactly what this EPA rule would have addressed. The city's own utility in Fayetteville, for instance, one of the highest in the state, also has contaminated PFAS water. So if they do that, bring public water to these people, it wouldn't necessarily help if they're not filtering it out. And what she said to me today is she was just boggled. She had no idea why they would choose to do this and only kind of take those 4 chemicals out. She said, make it make sense. And she referred to this move as a slap in the face.
Let's take a quick break right there and we'll be right back. You're listening to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland here with WRAL climate reporter Liz McLaughlin, and we're talking about the EPA's rollback of drinking water protections for PFAS chemicals and the ripple effects it's already having here in North Carolina. So, Liz, what are health experts saying about the implications of this?
Sure. If you're wondering why should I care that this is in the water, there's a growing body of research about just how harmful these chemicals are. And it seems the more we learn, the more we know about how dangerous they are. So they've been linked to health impacts, everything from cancer, various cancers, liver damage, kidney damage, reproductive issues, like birth defects, developmental delays in children, even like things like a suppressed immune system. So it could lead to kind of other, diseases taking hold here. They're also found in the blood of nearly everyone in the U.S. So this is a really widespread, ubiquitous problem. As we said, they're called forever chemicals. So they just take so long to break down in the human body or in the environment. So as we keep making more and more of this stuff, putting it in the environment, it's not like this problem just goes away. So if we turned off the tap today, it would still be a problem years, decades, centuries into the future, and there's no sign of that stopping. I spoke with Melanie Benesh with the Environmental Working Group, who says that rolling back protections could directly impact how safe our water is.
Utilities may have to treat to a different standard, which ultimately means that the water that we drink, that we serve to our family, may be less safe. It really comes back on ordinary people who are going to have to pay through higher disease risk and maybe ultimately the loss of loved ones.
So, what is the EPA saying about why it decided to make this move?
So the EPA says this is about giving utilities more time to comply, and that it still plans to hold polluters accountable through enforcement. But what we've seen so far with this EPA, and at least the kind of policy move from this administration, is towards deregulation. They're kind of saying that the state should be responsible for this, for controlling this, and that industry will sort of regulate itself. Now, that is a that's something I've also heard from utilities. They were a little nervous about how they're going to meet this deadline, or just anticipated some roadblocks, because with this rule, again, a lot of people in North Carolina and in these contaminated communities celebrated this as a step towards clean drinking water. The problem no one's debating is that there's contaminated drinking water everywhere. Okay, this rule is making a way to force the water to be cleaner. However, it's kind of on the wallets of ratepayers, right? So these utilities are going to have to install these expensive filters and therefore likely raise rates. And the Fayetteville Utility PWC has already said that's what they're, anticipating. Wilmington already installed one of these filters, and ratepayers are footing the bill for this pollution they didn't cause. Meanwhile, these companies that put it there still making a profit, not paying a dime. So that was a criticism towards this rule that already existed, and a valid one, right? Why are we paying for something we never dumped in the water? Ratepayers. And smaller utilities, places like Raleigh Water, big utility. They also have low levels of PFAS, so they're able to control those levels and would get it to what the limit would be without installing some big fancy filter. But a small rural area that doesn't have that many ratepayers paying in and has high contamination levels, they're like, how are we going to do this? Because it might make water unaffordable. There might not be enough engineers or just carbon for everyone across the nation to make these upgrades. So there are some logistical elements there that I think, that I don't think the EPA right now is making up. But what will adding 2 years to that do? Not sure. What will revisiting the science? Everything that I've seen that the EPA has used in deciding these, we're talking about legitimate peer-reviewed studies. A lot of the questioning of the science has been a push by industry, by manufacturing of these chemicals. So again, I think the problem, the harmfulness of these chemicals is pretty established. I think it's just a big debate about how do we fix this and who foots the bill.
And so what happens next?
The EPA says it plans to propose a new rule in the fall, taking out those kind of 4 chemicals from the list of what will be regulated, and then finalize it next spring. But until then, these are tens of thousands of compounds that are going unregulated, and that means utilities don't have to test for them, they don't have to treat them, and there's no real action to stop PFAS at the source. These chemicals still being manufactured. If you or I wanted to cut our exposure, maybe stop buying cosmetics with them or fast food containers, there's no labeling. So there's not even a consumer sort of way we can try to limit our exposure without just testing, paying a lot of money to test on your own or footing the bill for a filter in your own home. These chemicals are still being manufactured, companies still profiting off them, and there's just nothing in place to prevent future dumping into our water supplies. So what some advocates are suggesting is regulating these as a source, stopping it or as a class of chemicals, stopping it at the source so that there's not as much to clean up to begin with. Some are saying let's take a step back from regulation, figure out what the real problem is, what the cost is, before we decide we're going to slap a rule on everyone to comply with it.
Okay, a lot of moving pieces here, and I'm sure there will be changes to come. Thank you so much, Liz. That's today's WRAL Daily Download. For more environmental reporting and updates on PFAS in North Carolina, visit WRAL.com. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. That's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.